Section 1. The World They Built. There is a moment near the beginning of Avatar, The Last Airbender, where a 12-year-old boy named Aang wakes up inside a sphere of ice, surrounded by a world that has aged 100 years without him. And the first thing he does is smile. Not because the world is fine, not because things are going to be easy. He smiles because there is a girl in front of him, and the world is new, and he is, at his core, someone who finds wonder in the fact of being alive. That smile is the whole show. Everything that follows, all 3 seasons, all 61 episodes, all the war and the grief and the philosophy buried in every frame, that is all just context for that smile. The show is asking from its very first scene whether it is possible to remain that open, that present, that awake to the miracle of the moment when the world around you is on fire, when the people you loved are gone, when the weight of a destiny you never asked for has been placed on your small, 12-year-old shoulders. The answer the show spends 3 seasons working out is not a simple yes. It is something more honest and more difficult than that. And that honesty, that willingness to sit with difficult answers, is why Avatar, The Last Airbender, endures the way it does. It does not tell you that everything is going to be fine. It tells you something quieter and more useful. It tells you that balance is not a destination, it is a practice. A daily, imperfect, occasionally painful practice that you commit to not because you are certain you will succeed, but because the alternative, the unbalanced world, the world where one element or one ideology or one empire is allowed to swallow everything else, is something no living creature can survive for long. That is the philosophical spine of the show, and it was not arrived at casually. When Brian Konietzko and Michael DiMartino first began developing the series around 2001, they drew from an extraordinary range of sources: Tibetan Buddhist monasticism, Hindu chakra philosophy, Taoist cosmology, Confucian ethics, Japanese martial arts traditions, Chinese elemental philosophy going back to the I Ching and the Tao Te Ching, and decades of animated storytelling from both the American and Japanese traditions. They spent 3 years building the world before the show ever aired. 3 years thinking about what each nation believed, how those beliefs shaped their architecture and their music and their martial arts and their relationship with the natural world, how a war would change those cultures over 100 years, and what a child who had missed all of that, who had been asleep in the ice while history happened, would feel when he finally woke up. The result is a show with philosophical depth that operates on multiple levels simultaneously. On the surface, it is an adventure story. A boy must master 4 elements and defeat a tyrant before a comet supercharges the Fire Nation's army and ends the last chance for peace. That is the plot. But underneath the plot, running as a kind of continuous philosophical current through every scene, is something much older and much more interesting. Avatar is a sustained meditation on the nature of balance, on the cost of power, on the difference between the honor you inherit and the honor you earn, on what it means to carry grief without being consumed by it, on how empires justify themselves and what it costs ordinary people when they do, on the relationship between a person and their destiny, on whether it is possible to end cycles of violence without becoming violent yourself. These are not questions for children, and yet the show asks them through the eyes of children, which turns out to be exactly the right lens. Because children ask the questions adults have learned to stop asking. A 12-year-old will look at a war that has lasted 100 years and say, "But why does it have to keep going?" And the adults around him will have 100 reasons, 100 justifications, 100 layers of ideology and national identity and generational trauma that explain why the war cannot stop. And the 12-year-old will listen to all of it and still not understand, because the 12-year-old has not yet been taught to accept the unacceptable as inevitable. That is Aang. That is the character the show puts at the center of its moral universe. Not a warrior, not a conqueror, a monk, a pacifist, a child who would rather airbend around a problem than through it. And the show never asks him to stop being that. It asks something harder. It asks him to hold on to everything he believes about life and compassion and non-violence in a world that keeps presenting him with situations where violence seems like the only answer. And then it watches to see what he does. What makes Avatar last? What makes people return to it at 16 and 26 and 36 and find new layers every time? Is that the show never resolves this tension cheaply. It never gives Aang an easy out. Every moral question it raises gets taken seriously. Every character who disagrees with Aang about how to save the world has reasons for their position that the show respects, even when it ultimately comes down on a different side. Katara, who wants justice so badly she can feel it in her blood. Sokka, who thinks in tactics and strategies, while everyone else is thinking in principles. Toph, who sees the world through vibration and sensation, and has very little patience for abstractions. Zuko, who believes that honor is something external that can be recaptured, until he slowly, painfully learns that it was always internal. Each of these characters carries a different philosophical tradition. Each of them pushes against Aang's worldview in a different way, and the show gives all of them space to be right about something and wrong about something else. It is not a show with a single message. It is a show with a conversation. A long, patient, beautifully animated conversation about how to live in a world that is out of balance and what each one of us owes to the effort of restoring it. Tonight we are going to move through that conversation slowly. We are going to follow the philosophy the way you would follow a river, from its source in the mountain to wherever it eventually finds the sea. We are going to talk about what each element means, not just as a fighting style, but as a way of seeing the world. We are going to talk about what Taoism actually is, and why the show understood it well enough to build a cosmology on top of it. We are going to talk about Buddhism, and what it really means to open a chakra, and why Aang's decision at the end of the series is not a compromise, but a completion. We are going to talk about grief, and how the show treats it with more honesty than most adult dramas manage. We are going to spend time with Iroh, who is one of the wisest fictional characters ever put to screen, and talk about what his obsession with tea actually means. We are going to spend a long time with Zuko, because his journey is the show's most detailed philosophical argument about the nature of identity and whether people can genuinely change. And we are going to end by talking about what all of this means for us, not as viewers of a cartoon, but as people who live in a world that is, in its own way, always slightly out of balance. So get comfortable. Let your breath slow down. You do not need to track every word or follow every thread. This is meant to wash over you the way the show itself washes over you. Felt before it is understood, absorbed before it is analyzed. And, somewhere in the current of it, you might find something that feels like yours to keep. Before we go on, wherever you are right now, drop it in the comments. The time, the place, whatever city or country or quiet corner of the world you are falling asleep in tonight. And if this kind of long, slow, careful content is something you want to keep finding when you come back here, subscribing is the one thing that makes sure you do. Section 2. The 4 elements as a map of the human soul. Before Avatar, the 4 classical elements, fire, earth, water, and air, were already ancient. The ancient Greeks organized their understanding of the physical world around them. In Chinese philosophy, they appear in a slightly different form as the 5 phases, or wuxing, with metal and wood added to the original 4. In Hindu cosmology, the 5 great elements known as the Mahabhutas form the material substrate of all existence. In Buddhist teaching, the Buddha himself used the 4 elements as a foundation for mindfulness practice, as a way of training the mind to observe the body as a collection of impermanent processes rather than a fixed, solid self. The creators of Avatar understood all of this, and they made a decision that sounds simple but has enormous implications. They decided that the 4 elements would not just be physical forces, they would also be philosophies, personalities, ways of being in the world. Each nation would be defined not only by what they bend, but by how their element shapes their relationship to everything, to conflict, to knowledge, to each other, to their own inner life. Start with air, because Aang starts with air, and the show does too. Airbending is rooted in the philosophy of freedom. The air nomads, Aang's people, were a monastic civilization organized around the principle of non-attachment. They did not own land. They did not accumulate wealth. They moved between 4 great temples scattered across the highest points of the world, carried by sky bison, committed to a way of life that held nothing too tightly. Their bending philosophy reflects this. Airbending, as choreographed for the show using the real martial art of Bagua Zhang, is defined by circular, evasive movement. An airbender does not stand still and absorb a blow. An airbender is not there when the blow arrives. The goal is never to oppose force directly. The goal is to render force irrelevant by simply not being where it wants to land. This is a deeply Taoist idea. The Tao Te Ching, the foundational text of Taoism, written by the philosopher Lao Tzu sometime around the 5th or 6th century before the Common Era, is full of this principle. Water wears away rock, not by opposing it, but by flowing around it, through it, over it, finding every weakness through patient persistence. The sage does not force, the sage flows. The air nomads embody this at the level of their entire civilization, and Aang carries it in his body, in the way he moves through the world, always slightly lighter than he should be, always slightly less attached to any particular outcome than the people around him. The philosophical cost of air is rootedness. Aang can evade anything. He struggles to stand still. He struggles to commit, to be present in the specific gravity of a moment that requires him not to move through it, but to remain inside it. His training with Earthbender Toph is not just an elemental exercise. It is a correction. It is the world giving him what his nature cannot supply on its own. The weight he has been missing. Now feel the weight of Earth. Earthbending is grounded in the philosophy of permanence. The Earth Kingdom is the world's largest civilization, ancient and bureaucratic, and deeply resistant to change. Earthbending, based on the real martial art of Hung Gar, is characterized by low stances, rooted footing, powerful direct strikes. An earthbender meets force with force. They stand their ground. They wait for the right moment to respond with overwhelming power. There is no evasion in earthbending. There is endurance and patience and the certainty that the mountain does not move for the storm. The philosophical tradition underlying earthbending is Confucian as much as anything else. Confucianism places enormous value on stability, on social order maintained through proper relationships, on tradition as the vehicle of wisdom accumulated over generations. The Earth Kingdom, with its rigid class structure, its ancient bureaucracy, its walls within walls within walls, is a Confucian civilization. And Toph, who breaks every Confucian rule about proper behavior for a girl of her class, who runs away from her wealthy family to fight in underground earthbending tournaments, who bends metal when no one in recorded history has ever bent metal, embodies the cost of unchallenged stability. Stability taken too far becomes stagnation. The mountain that never moves eventually stops being protection and starts being a prison. Water carries entirely different energy. Waterbending is modeled on Tai Chi, the most circular and flowing of the real-world martial arts it draws from, and it is built around the principle of redirection. A waterbender does not absorb force and does not evade it. A waterbender takes the force as it arrives and sends it somewhere else. This requires something that neither earth nor air philosophy requires: the willingness to first accept what is coming before doing anything about it. You cannot redirect a blow you have not felt. You have to let it reach you, recognize its direction, understand its momentum, and then, from that place of genuine contact, guide it somewhere new. This is deeply therapeutic as a philosophy. It is also deeply demanding. Katara is the show's great waterbender, and her journey is about learning exactly this. Her anger at the Fire Nation, at the man who killed her mother, at every injustice she has witnessed, is absolutely real and absolutely valid. The water in her does not pretend otherwise. But water that cannot be redirected, water that only flows in one direction no matter what, is not waterbending. It is flooding. And the show watches Katara wrestle with this for 3 seasons, honoring her anger while slowly, gently, testing her ability to transform it rather than be driven by it. The Water Tribe's combination of the northern and southern cultures also reflects the Taoist yin-yang framework in a specific way. Water is receptive. Water is the yin element, associated with the moon, with darkness, with the interior life, with the kind of intelligence that flows around problems rather than through them. And yet the moon spirit, which empowers waterbending, is one of the oldest and most powerful forces in the entire Avatar world, dwelling in the spirit oasis at the heart of the Northern Water Tribe as a small, ordinary fish. The mightiest force in the ocean hides in a pond. That is the show's whole philosophy of power in a single image. Fire is last, and fire is the most misunderstood of the 4, both by other characters in the show and by viewers who spend the first season treating it as simply the villain's element. Iroh corrects this misunderstanding in one of the show's most important philosophical speeches. He tells Zuko that fire is the element of power, that the people of the Fire Nation have desire, will, and energy to achieve their goals, and that fire is also the element of life, of warmth, of the sun itself, which every living thing on Earth depends upon. Fire is not evil. Fire in balance is life. Fire out of balance is destruction. The philosophical tradition that governs firebending, as the show depicts it, is a corrupted form of something much older and much more beautiful. The Sun Warriors, the original firebenders, treated fire as a sacred gift from the dragons. Their philosophy connected fire to breath, to life force, to the internal energy of living beings. Firebending at its source is not about conquering anything external. It is about releasing the energy that already lives inside you, cleanly and honestly, without fear or aggression as the fuel. The dancing dragon form, which Aang and Zuko learn from the last two dragons alive, is not a weapon. It is a practice of inner alignment. What the Fire Nation did, under Sozin and then Azulon and then Ozai, was to take that source philosophy and corrupt it by replacing the internal fuel. Instead of breath and life force, the Fire Nation began fueling its bending with rage, with conquest, with the need to dominate. And the result is that their fire became hotter and more destructive, but also less steady, less connected to its own source. Azula's blue fire is the extreme expression of this. It burns hotter than any other fire in the show because it is fueled by the most controlled, most intense version of that corrupted internal state. A psychological pressure so extreme that it eventually shatters her. The four elements, then, are not just fighting styles. They are four different answers to the question of how to move through a difficult world. Air says, do not be there when the difficulty arrives. Earth says, stand firm and endure. Water says, accept the difficulty and redirect it. Fire says, transform it with the energy of your own living, breathing, embodied self. None of these answers is complete on its own. That is the entire point of the Avatar. The Avatar is the person who must hold all four answers at once, who must know when to evade and when to stand firm, when to redirect and when to transform. The Avatar is not powerful because they can bend all four elements. They are powerful because they carry all four philosophies and have access to every possible response, to every possible moment. That is what mastery looks like, not having one perfect answer, having the wisdom to choose the right one. Section 3. The weight of balance. The word balance gets used so often in conversations about Avatar that it can start to feel like a placeholder, a word that sounds meaningful without landing anywhere specific. So it is worth slowing down and asking what the show actually means when it talks about balance. Because the answer is more interesting and more demanding than the word implies. The philosophical root is Taoist. The Tao Te Ching, which shaped so much of the show's cosmology, does not describe balance as a steady state. It does not describe a world where everything is equal and settled and humming along without friction. The Tao describes a dynamic, a continuous movement between opposites that generates reality through their interaction. Yin and Yang are not two things that become one when they are balanced. They are two movements in an eternal dance, each one containing a seed of the other, each one requiring the other in order to be what it is. Darkness is not the absence of light. It is the condition that makes light visible. Cold is not the absence of heat. It is the partner that gives heat its meaning. The show renders this literally in the spirit oasis at the Northern Water Tribe, where the moon spirit Tui and the ocean spirit La are two koi fish that circle each other in a perfect yin-yang pattern. One white fish with a black spot, one black fish with a white spot. They move in a continuous circle, each one chasing the other. And this movement, this ceaseless flowing around each other, is what maintains the moon in the sky and the ocean in the sea. It is what keeps water bending alive. It is what keeps the boundary between the physical world and the spirit world stable. When Zhao kills the moon spirit in the Siege of the North, he is not just killing an animal, he is destroying a relationship. He is breaking the pattern. And the immediate result is not simply that water bending stops working, though it does. The immediate result is that the natural world is thrown into a state of wrongness so profound that it becomes visible. The moon turns red, the ocean goes still, the world waits. Because without the yin, the yang has nowhere to move. And without the yang, the yin has nothing to push against. They do not exist independently. They exist in relation, and the relation is the thing. This is a profound and counterintuitive idea in a culture that tends to think of balance as the absence of tension. The Taoist understanding is exactly the opposite. Balance is not the absence of tension. Balance is healthy tension. It is the tension between opposite forces that are both real, both necessary, both present, and both moving. The moment one of them is removed, or suppressed, or overwhelmed by the other, balance is not achieved. Balance is destroyed. Avatar tells this story at every level. The Fire Nation's crime is not simply conquest, it is the elimination of plurality. 100 years of war has not just killed people and destroyed cities. It has worked systematically to remove the other three elements from the world. The Fire Nation hunted and killed all the airbenders in a single night, erasing an entire philosophical tradition, an entire way of being in the world. They suppress waterbending in the south. They occupy the Earth Kingdom. What they are building, without perhaps even consciously intending it, is a world with only one element, only one philosophy, only one answer to every question, and such a world is not a world in balance. It is a world that has forgotten what balance even means. The show finds this dynamic not just in geopolitics but in individual characters. Azula is the most precise individual portrait of imbalance in the show. She is a firebender of extraordinary power and intelligence, but she has eliminated every other element from her inner life. There is no water in Azula, no capacity to redirect, to adapt, to let something move through her and emerge transformed. There is no earth, no quiet rootedness that exists apart from performance and domination. There is no air, no lightness, no ability to step back and let something pass without needing to control its direction. There is only fire, only will, only the relentless pressure of a person who has turned herself into a weapon so perfect and so complete that there is nothing left of her that is not a weapon. And the result, which the show depicts in the final episodes with a visual precision that makes it almost physically painful to watch, is that Azula's fire begins to flicker. The thing that has always been her defining characteristic, the thing that has made her untouchable, begins to betray her. Because fire separated from everything else, fire that has no oxygen of humility, no water of emotional honesty, no earth of groundedness, is not sustained fire. It is a fire that burns hotter and hotter until it has consumed everything available to it, and then it turns on itself. Ozai is the same dynamic at civilizational scale. The Fire Lord has spent his reign eliminating every check on his power. He has surrounded himself with people who fear him, has had his wife exiled and his son disfigured and banished, has raised his daughter as a tool rather than a person. He has eliminated the relationships that could provide the gentle resistance that genuine balance requires. And the Fire Nation under his rule has become exactly what he is: powerful, technically advanced, expanding, and utterly without the reciprocal relationship to the rest of the world that would make that power sustainable. Iroh is Ozai's precise philosophical opposite, and the show makes this explicit in multiple ways. Iroh draws from all four nations. He drinks Earth Kingdom tea and studies waterbending philosophy and respects air nomad spiritual traditions and understands fire at its ancient, non-corrupted source. He has achieved genuine balance not by choosing the middle ground, not by being moderate about everything, but by taking each philosophy seriously on its own terms and then allowing them to coexist inside him in productive tension. Iroh is warm in the way fire is warm. He is patient in the way water is patient. He is grounded in the way earth is grounded. And he is free in the way air is free. He contains the world without being owned by any part of it. This is what the show means by balance, not the careful management of competing forces to arrive at a neutral outcome. The full presence of opposing truths, each one honored for what it genuinely is, each one in dialogue with the others, none of them suppressed, none of them allowed to swallow the rest. It is a demanding standard. It is a standard that requires constant attention and constant willingness to be changed by what you encounter. It requires the willingness to be moved, which is the thing Azula and Ozai are most afraid of. Because to be moved is to admit that something outside yourself has power over you, and power over yourself is the one thing they cannot share. The Avatar is the living embodiment of this kind of balance. Not because the Avatar is perfect, but because the Avatar's function is to hold all four perspectives simultaneously, to be the one person in the world whose identity is not tied to any single element or any single nation, and therefore the one person who can see the whole picture. In a world where everyone is defined by what they bend, the Avatar is the person who is defined by all of it, and therefore by none of it exclusively. The Avatar is what balance looks like when it walks around in a human body. And in Aang's case, that function is expressed through the specific character of a child who smiles at new things. Because genuine balance requires openness. It requires the willingness to be surprised by what you find, when you sit with a perspective that is not your own. It requires something very close to what Zen Buddhism calls beginner's mind, the quality of encountering each moment as if for the first time, without the accumulated weight of past positions telling you what you are allowed to find there. Aang's greatest spiritual gift is not his airbending, it is his beginner's mind. The 100 years of sleep did not fill him with the worldly wisdom of someone who has watched the war unfold. They left him, paradoxically, more present than anyone else in the story. He has not spent a century watching the Fire Nation's atrocities accumulate into a settled, hardened position about what Fire Nation people are. He has not watched people he loved die slowly enough to metabolize the grief into bitterness. He arrives in this war still genuinely open to being surprised by it, still genuinely capable of looking at Zuko, his enemy, and seeing something there worth understanding. That openness is what balance requires. And the show spends 3 seasons testing it mercilessly, asking how far it can be stretched before it breaks, and discovering that it stretches further than anyone, including Aang himself, thought possible. Section 4. Aang and the Buddhist Path. In the 2nd season of Avatar, in an episode called The Guru, a spiritual teacher named Guru Pathik tells Aang that he needs to open his 7 chakras in order to gain mastery of the Avatar state. He explains what each chakra governs, what energy it holds, and what blocks it, and the language he uses is drawn almost directly from Hindu and Buddhist contemplative traditions going back thousands of years. The 7 chakras, described in various Hindu texts including the Yoga scriptures and later elaborated in Tantric traditions, are understood as wheels or vortices of energy located along the spine and through the center of the body. Each one governs a different dimension of human experience. Each one can be blocked, made stagnant, by a specific kind of psychological or emotional holding. And each one, when opened and flowing freely, allows a different kind of life force to move through the person. Guru Pathik tells Aang that the 1st chakra, located at the base of the spine, deals with survival and is blocked by fear. The 2nd, in the lower abdomen, deals with pleasure and is blocked by guilt. The 3rd, in the stomach, deals with willpower and is blocked by shame. The 4th, at the heart, deals with love and is blocked by grief. The 5th, at the throat, deals with truth and is blocked by lies, specifically the lies we tell ourselves. The 6th, in the forehead, deals with insight and is blocked by illusion. The 7th, at the crown of the head, deals with pure cosmic energy and is blocked by earthly attachment. The show handles this with remarkable accuracy and remarkable empathy. It does not present chakra philosophy as a quick fix or a series of steps to follow in order to unlock a power upgrade. It presents it honestly as a genuine spiritual challenge, one that requires Aang to look directly at the things he is most afraid to look at. His fear, his guilt, his shame, his grief, the lies he has told himself about his own nature and his own choices, the illusions that protect him from the full weight of reality, and finally his attachment, specifically his attachment to Katara, to the love he feels for her and the safety that love represents. This last one is where the show diverges from strict Buddhist doctrine in a way that is philosophically interesting and narratively important. The 7th chakra requires the release of all earthly attachment, and Guru Pathik tells Aang that this means releasing his attachment to Katara, to everyone he loves, in order to allow pure universal energy to flow through him. And Aang refuses. He feels Katara in danger, closes the chakra back down, and leaves the Guru's teachings unfinished to go save her. The strict Buddhist reading of this moment is that Aang has failed the test. Attachment is precisely what the Buddhist path asks us to release. Attachment is the cause of suffering. Attachment is what keeps us bound to the cycle of rebirth. The goal is not to stop loving people. It is to love them without clinging, to be fully present to them without needing them to be a certain way, without making them the anchor of your identity and the condition of your peace. But the show does not condemn Aang for choosing Katara over enlightenment. It is more sophisticated than that. What it shows is the consequence. Without full mastery of the Avatar state, Aang is more vulnerable. When he is struck down in the crystal caves beneath Ba Sing Se and dies, temporarily, before being brought back by Katara, it is a direct result of that unfinished spiritual work. The show does not moralize about this. It simply shows you the physics of it. The incomplete chakra means incomplete access. The incomplete access means vulnerability. The vulnerability has consequences. And then, at the very end of the series, After everything Aang has been through, after 3 seasons of carrying the full weight of the world's imbalance, after losing Ba Sing Se and watching the hope of liberation be extinguished and finding it again and carrying it forward, the show offers him a solution that is not a compromise but a completion. The lion turtle teaches Aang energy bending, not as a new element to master, as the original technology of the spirit, the source from which all bending came, the power to reach into the energy of another living being and alter it at the deepest possible level. This is the show's answer to the problem of the seventh chakra. Aang does not have to choose between loving the world and having access to universal energy. He does not have to release his attachment to Katara or to any living thing in order to defeat Ozai. He finds a path that is consistent with his own deepest values, a path of compassionate intervention at the energetic level rather than lethal force. And that path is only available to him because his spirit is, as the lion turtle says, unbendable. His unwillingness to kill, which everyone around him has been treating as a spiritual immaturity, a failure to accept the necessary cost of saving the world, turns out to be exactly the quality that makes him capable of the one thing no other avatar has ever done. You cannot bend the energy of another person without risking having your own energy bent in return. Only someone with a completely stable, completely honest, completely uncontrolled inner life can do it safely. And Aang's extraordinary capacity for love, for nonviolence, for openness, which the show has been honoring and testing and protecting for 3 seasons, is precisely that inner stability. The Buddhist resonance here is deep. The Buddha taught that the qualities we typically think of as virtues, compassion, nonviolence, openness, the willingness to be affected by the suffering of others, are not obstacles to spiritual power. They are its vehicle, the bodhisattva, the being who chooses to remain in the world rather than achieving personal liberation, who chooses to go back into the fire to help others find their way out, is not less enlightened than the sage on the mountain. The bodhisattva is expressing the highest form of the teaching that liberation is not something you achieve alone and then keep. It is something you live in relationship with all of your love intact. Aang is a bodhisattva. The show did not use that word, but it built the character along exactly those lines. His whole arc, from the frightened boy who ran away from his destiny to the young man who finds a way to honor both his love and his responsibility, is the arc of someone learning what it means to be truly awake in the middle of a world that is on fire. Not to transcend the fire. To be present within it, steady and open and loving and unmoved at the core, doing what the moment requires, without losing what makes him who he is. The meditation scenes throughout the show are worth sitting with in this context. When Aang goes into the avatar state, when he sinks into meditation to communicate with previous avatars, when he sits in the Fire Nation in a cave with a lion turtle resting nearby while the rest of the world prepares for the final battle, these are not scenes of escape. They are scenes of the deepest possible engagement with reality. To be still, in Buddhist practice, is not to check out. It is to become so fully present that the noise of the thinking mind no longer drowns out the signal of what is actually here. Aang is never more present than when he is still. And the show, which tracks his motion with such care throughout, knows this. The boy who never stops moving, who rides air scooters and launches himself off cliffs and fills every silence with a laugh or a joke or a question, the moments when he goes quiet are the moments when the show is asking you to pay the most attention. Because those moments are when the monk, the real monk who has been there all along under the 12-year-old's playfulness, is doing the work he was born to do. Section 5. The Grief Beneath Everything. The 3rd episode of Avatar, titled The Southern Air Temple, does something that no children's television show had any business doing in 2005. Aang returns home. He has not been to the Southern Air Temple in 100 years. He was 12 years old when he left it, frozen in ice before he ever had the chance to come back. And now he walks through the great stone corridors of his childhood home, calling out for the monks who raised him, looking into the rooms where he used to practice airbending, pointing out the places he remembers to Katara and Sokka with a warmth and excitement that is almost unbearable to watch. Because the audience already knows what he has not yet understood. There is no one here. There has been no one here for 100 years. When Aang finds his mentor's skeleton, the show does not look away. It does not cut to something else. It stays with Aang in that moment of recognition, with the full silence of what it means for a 12-year-old boy to understand in a single instant that everyone he has ever loved, every person who knew him before the ice, Every monk and student and sky bison handler in his entire civilization is gone. Not gone somewhere else. Gone entirely. Erased. The air nomads, a civilization of hundreds of thousands of people whose entire philosophy was built around nonviolence and freedom and the beauty of a world in balance, were killed in a single night by the Fire Nation so completely that only Aang himself survived. Only Aang survived because Aang was asleep in ice and the Fire Nation did not find him. He survived because he was absent, because he had run away from his destiny and the ice had taken him before he could return. The boy who is the embodiment of his people's value of freedom survived because he fled. And the guilt of that survival, the weight of what it means to be the last, is something the show carries through all 3 seasons without resolution. Because there is no resolution to it. There is only the learning to carry it. What Avatar does with grief is one of its most remarkable achievements, and it is an achievement that operates mostly below the level of explicit dialogue. The show does not give Aang therapy sessions where he processes his trauma. It does not give him a scene where he fully accepts his loss and moves on. It shows his grief in the things he does and the things he avoids, in the way he flinches from certain conversations and the way he throws himself into motion when stillness would require him to feel what is underneath. He displays what any clinical lens would recognize as symptoms consistent with post-traumatic stress, recurring nightmares, emotional numbness that cracks without warning into overwhelming feeling, hypervigilance in certain situations, the specific and powerful trigger of returning to the air temples where the past and the present collide. And the show never asks him to perform recovery faster than he is actually recovering. It never shows him having the big cathartic moment that makes everything okay. It shows him carrying the weight, step by step, finding moments of genuine joy within the carrying, which is actually what living with grief looks like. Joy does not require the grief to be resolved. Joy and grief live in the same body. Aang laughs and plays and does the penguin slide in the snow and rescues baby animals and makes friends everywhere he goes. And underneath all of it, every day, the grief is there. Present, real. The gravity that everything else moves around. Katara understands this better than anyone. She is carrying her own version of it. Her mother was killed by the Fire Nation when Katara was a small child. The loss is different from Aang's loss in scale. One person rather than an entire civilization, but the structure of the wound is similar. The sudden, violent absence of someone who was supposed to be there. The world that restructures itself around the gap and keeps going as if the gap is normal. The anger that lives inside the grief, that sometimes rises up and is almost indistinguishable from it. The show honors Katara's anger in a way that is philosophically important. It does not ask her to forgive before she is ready. It does not ask her to accept the loss of her mother as a spiritual lesson. When she finally confronts the man who killed her mother, the show lets her feel the full weight of what she wants to do. Lets the audience feel it with her. Lets it sit in the air for a long, uncomfortable moment before she makes her choice. And when she does make her choice, it is not because someone told her she should. It is because she has looked into the man's face and understood something about what killing him would cost her, about who she would have to become to do it, and live with having done it. It is her choice, made from her own depth, and the show does not award her with a tidy feeling of peace afterward. She just lives with it, differently than before. But she lives with it. Zuko's grief is different again. He is grieving the mother he lost, the childhood he lost, the father who looked at him and decided he was worth nothing. The grief underneath Zuko's rage is the specific grief of someone who was not permitted to be hurt. He was supposed to be Fire Nation royalty, which meant being strong, which meant not showing weakness, which meant converting every soft feeling into something harder, something that looked like anger, something his father could respect. By the time we meet Zuko, he has been converting grief into anger for years, and the anger has become so habitual that he has almost forgotten it ever had a softer origin. The show's genius is that it never lets the audience forget. Even in Zuko's most furious, most relentless moments, the creature at the center of all that fury is a boy who wanted his father to love him and his mother to stay and his destiny to be something other than what it turned out to be. The grief is always visible to the audience, even when it is invisible to Zuko himself. And watching Zuko slowly, painfully, over 3 full seasons learn to see it is one of the most quietly moving things the show does. The air nomad genocide, as a narrative device, is doing something important for the show beyond its role in Aang's personal arc. It is establishing that the world of Avatar is not a world where loss is abstract. The imbalance the avatar must restore is not a metaphysical condition. It is the direct result of specific choices made by specific people, choices that have specific, physical, visible human costs. Every refugee on the road is a cost. Every bombed-out village is a cost. Every person who has grown up in a world defined by the 100-Year War and has never known anything else is a cost. And the show keeps these costs visible. It does not let the large-scale narrative of nations and elements and cosmic balance cause you to forget that underneath all of it there are people, ordinary people with cabbages and tea shops and children to feed. The cabbage merchant is the show's funniest running joke and also its most honest recurring image. An ordinary person, just trying to move goods from one city to another, whose cart keeps getting destroyed by the wake of history. Not because he matters to the war, because he is in the way of it. He is the world's billions of people who are not heroes, who have no power over the forces that keep colliding around them, who just want to get their cabbages to market and go home. The fact that Avatar never lets you forget he exists is the fact that separates it from a show that only understands war as geopolitics and not as something that happens to people. Grief in Avatar is not a phase. It is a companion. The show teaches, through example rather than through instruction, the Buddhist understanding that suffering is not a problem to be solved. It is a condition of being alive in a world where things end and people leave and the beautiful things get broken. The question is not how to stop suffering. The question is how to remain open, how to remain capable of love and wonder and genuine connection while carrying the full weight of everything that has already been lost. Aang's smile, at the very beginning, is the answer the show offers. Not a denial of grief, not a performance of happiness over a hollow interior, but the specific smile of someone who understands that the world is worth loving, even knowing that loving it means grieving it. The 12-year-old in the ice who wakes up smiling is carrying 100 years of loss he does not yet know about. And after he learns about it, after he has carried it for 3 seasons, he can still smile. Not despite the grief. Alongside it. Both things true at once. Section 6 Iroh. The Philosopher in Exile. There is a scene in Avatar that is quietly, persistently recognized as one of the most emotionally devastating things that has ever appeared in a children's animated series. It is in the 2nd season. It is in an episode called The Tales of Ba Sing Se, and it is Iroh alone, in the Earth Kingdom city where he and Zuko are living in hiding, setting up a small memorial of flowers and candles and singing a song for his son, Lu Ten, who died in battle. Lu Ten was a soldier in Iroh's siege of Ba Sing Se, the great military campaign that defined the early part of Iroh's life before he turned away from the path of conquest. And that campaign, which Iroh abandoned when it was on the verge of success, is how we first understand that Iroh is not simply a kindly uncle figure who likes tea and makes jokes. He is a man who lost his son and was transformed by that loss so completely that he became an entirely different person. Not a better version of who he was. A different person. Before Lu Ten's death, Iroh was the Dragon of the West, a decorated military commander, a warrior of extraordinary ability, the crown prince of the Fire Nation, a man who defined himself by conquest and power and the kind of public honor that the Fire Nation understood. After Lu Ten's death, none of that remained. Not because he lost his ability, because he lost his reason to use it that way. The show does not show us this transformation directly. We only hear about it, in fragments, from other characters and from Iroh himself. But its consequences are visible in every scene he appears in. Iroh is a man who has been to the place where the fire burns everything away, who has stood in the ruins of what he thought his life was, and looked around and made a choice about what to do next. And what he chose was tea. This sounds like a joke. It is the opposite of a joke. In Chinese and Japanese philosophical traditions, tea is not primarily a drink. Tea ceremony, whether in the Zen tradition of Chado in Japan or in the Chinese tradition of Gongfu Cha, is a contemplative practice. The preparation and serving of tea is a form of meditation. It requires complete presence. It requires attention to each small step, the temperature of the water, the quality of the leaves, the rinsing of the vessels, the timing of the pour. It is a practice of finding the sacred in the ordinary, of asserting that this moment, right now, this cup, this warmth between your hands, this steam rising, is sufficient. It is enough. The world has not yet ended. There is still this. Iroh makes tea in prison. He makes tea on a ship in the middle of the ocean. He opens a tea shop in Ba Sing Se and names it the Jasmine Dragon, after Jasmine Dragon Pearl, a real Chinese green tea associated with refinement and patience. He makes tea for enemies. He makes tea for Toph when they meet by chance and have a conversation about the people they love and cannot reach. He makes tea for himself when he is alone, which is often, because Iroh is a man who knows how to be alone without being lonely. That is one of the gifts that grief gives to the people who walk all the way through it instead of around it. His philosophy is Taoist in its bones. The central concept is the one he explains to Zuko in one of the show's most quietly important scenes, when he draws a circle in the dirt and talks about what each nation is, not in terms of military power or cultural prejudice, but in terms of what each element fundamentally is. Fire Nation, desire, will, energy. Water Tribe, change and flow. Earth Kingdom, substance and endurance. Air Nomads, freedom and new beginnings. Then he says the thing that Zuko is not yet ready to hear. He says that wisdom comes from drawing from many different places. If you take it from only one place, it becomes rigid and stale. This is the Taoist principle of non-exclusion. The Tao moves through everything. It does not favor the mountain over the river, the sun over the moon, the dragon over the fish. To walk with the Tao is to be as comfortable in each of these as in any other. To resist the Tao is to insist on one thing and to call that insistence identity, which is exactly what the Fire Nation has done, and exactly what Zuko has done, and exactly what Iroh has spent the years since Lu Ten's death undoing in himself. What Iroh knows that he cannot easily transmit is that the undoing takes time. It takes loss. It takes genuine contact with consequences you did not intend and cannot undo. He cannot give Zuko the wisdom he has earned through his own suffering. He can only walk alongside him, pour him tea, offer the occasional observation, trust the long arc. The trust itself is a form of love. Most of Iroh's expressions of love are quiet to the point of invisibility. He does not make speeches about how much he cares for Zuko. He makes tea. He gets up early. He pays attention. He is there. There is a moment near the end of the show where Zuko and Iroh are finally reunited after Zuko has chosen the right path, and Iroh has been quietly waiting for it. Zuko comes to him expecting to be told he is forgiven, or perhaps to be refused forgiveness, and Iroh simply opens his arms and pulls him in, and weeps with relief, and says only that he was never angry. He was afraid that Zuko had chosen the same path Iroh had once walked, the path of conquest and pride and the slow forgetting of what actually matters. The scene is not about forgiveness. It is about a man who loved a child so completely that his greatest fear was not his own death, but that the child might lose the best parts of himself. That is what the show means when it talks about the power of Earth in a person. Not stubbornness, not rigidity, the kind of grounded, patient, present love that does not require a particular outcome, that simply remains. Iroh remains. Through Zuko's worst moments, through the betrayals and the poor choices and the long spiral of someone trying to find their way home, Iroh remains. Not demanding, not judging, just there. With the tea. The wisdom Iroh embodies is not the wisdom of someone who has figured everything out. It is the wisdom of someone who has made enough mistakes to understand that wisdom is not a possession, it is a direction. You do not arrive at wisdom and then have it. You move toward it, every day, through the small choices, the moment you choose patience instead of frustration, the moment you choose to listen instead of speaking, the moment you set out 2 cups instead of 1 because there is always the possibility of company. He is also the show's argument that transformation is possible at any age. Iroh was the Dragon of the West. He was a general who laid siege to cities. He was a man built for conquest who spent decades walking that path. And then he turned. Not overnight. Not through a single dramatic revelation. Through the accumulated weight of what he had seen and done and lost. Through the slow, painful process of looking at himself honestly and deciding to become something different. This is the philosophical claim that the show makes most quietly and most insistently. People can change. Not because they decide to, because they do the work, every day, in small ways, until one day the person who was the Dragon of the West is a man sitting in a humble tea shop in Ba Sing Se, setting out cups, warming the water to exactly the right temperature, paying attention to small things, and waiting, with all the patience of someone who has learned that patience is a form of love, for his nephew to come home. Section 7. Zuko's Furnace, the Philosophy of Becoming. Zuko is, by general consensus, one of the most beautifully written characters in the history of animation. Not because he is likable, although he does become that. Not because his arc is dramatic, although it is extraordinarily so. But because his transformation is real. It happens through recognizable psychological processes. It takes a realistic amount of time. It involves genuine backsliding and genuine cost, and it arrives at something earned rather than simply delivered. The show introduces him as an antagonist so precisely constructed that it would be easy to read him as a villain. He is hunting the Avatar. He is Fire Nation royalty. He has the scar and the rage and the absolute conviction that nothing matters as much as completing his mission. But the show gives you one piece of information in the very first episode that changes everything you will ever see when you look at him. The scar on his face was given to him by his father. Not in battle, not by an enemy, by his own father in the formal ritual of Agni Kai, because Zuko spoke out of turn during a war meeting, because he dared to express concern about sending troops to die in a battle plan he believed was wrong. That is the cost of having a conscience in the Fire Nation. That is what it cost a 14-year-old boy to say, "I think this is wrong." His father burned his face and expelled him from the only home he had ever known and sent him on an impossible quest, the capture of a 100-year vanished Avatar, knowing full well that failure was the only possible outcome, as a way of saying, "You will never be worthy of coming home." Everything Zuko does in the first season, all the aggression and the intensity and the obsessive singularity of purpose, is the behavior of a person trying to earn back the love of someone who has decided he is not worth loving. The show makes sure you understand this. Not through on-the-nose dialogue, but through the way Zuko's face changes when he talks about his father, through the way he carries the mission not as a warrior's goal but as a drowning person carries a rope. His honor is not abstract. His honor is the one thing he believes, if he can get it back, will make his father love him again. This is one of the show's most honest and most painful recognitions. The lengths people will go to in pursuit of approval from a parent who is incapable of giving it. The way that pursuit can swallow an entire identity can become the whole structure of a life. Because the alternative, accepting that the approval is not coming, that the love was never there in the form you needed, is something so devastating that almost any amount of damage is preferable to confronting it. Zuko spends 2.5 seasons refusing to confront it. He chases the Avatar. He makes progress, loses it, starts again. He has moments where the better part of him rises to the surface, where he makes a choice that costs him something and is clearly the right choice, and then he retreats from it because making the right choice means abandoning the quest, and abandoning the quest means abandoning the only path he can see back to his father's love. The show does not shortcut this. It lets it take as long as it actually takes. The episode Zuko Alone is the show at its most willing to sit in discomfort. Zuko is traveling alone through the Earth Kingdom, disguised, hungry, having nothing. He finds a family in a small village. He grows close to the young son of the family, a boy who in some ways mirrors who Zuko might have been if his childhood had been different. Warmer, less defended, more capable of asking for what he needs. And when violence comes to the village and Zuko defends the family, using his firebending to protect them, his identity is revealed. And the family, and the village, look at him with a fear and a hostility that says everything about what Fire Nation means to Earth Kingdom people. He has done the right thing. He has protected people who could not protect themselves. And it costs him the only human warmth he has experienced in a long time. This is the show's honest portrayal of the cost of national identity. Zuko is not being rejected because of who he is. He is being rejected because of what he represents, because of what people who look like him and bend like him have done to people who look like these villagers. That rejection is understandable. It is also tragic. Because the very thing Zuko needed, the experience of genuine community, the recognition that doing right could feel like coming home, is taken from him by the weight of what his nation has done. The low point is in the second season finale. Zuko, given a genuine choice between joining Aang and choosing the right side, chooses the wrong one. He sides with Azula. He helps strike down the Avatar. He returns to Ba Sing Se as a conqueror. He gets everything he was promised: his honor restored, his father's approval, his place in the Fire Nation, and immediately it is wrong. The show does not delay this. It does not give him even an episode of satisfaction. The moment Zuko has everything he thought he wanted, the emptiness of it is visible. Because what he wanted was never the honor or the throne. What he wanted was to be loved. And his father's version of love, the approval given for conquest and cruelty, is not the thing he was actually seeking. It just wore the same name. The philosophical framework here is drawn from Maslow, from Confucian ethics about genuine moral cultivation versus mere social conformity, and from what psychologists would call the difference between extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. Zuko has spent his entire life pursuing an extrinsic standard, the honor defined by the Fire Nation's imperial culture, the love given for successful domination, the identity built entirely on the outside, and every time he reaches the standard is hollow. The turning begins in Ba Sing Se. It is not dramatic. It is a series of small, private moments where Zuko begins to look honestly at what he has done and what it has cost. The nightmares, the anger that will not resolve into anything, the conversation with his father that should be a homecoming and instead is a transaction. The uncle's cell, empty. The tea shop, shut. He finds the Jasmine Dragon, the tea shop Iroh was running, and it is clear and abandoned. And the absence of his uncle is more devastating than any punishment his father could have given him. Because his uncle's absence is the consequence of a choice Zuko made, and Zuko can feel the weight of it in a way he cannot feel the weight of political consequences. The turn is slow. It happens through 100 small scenes. The field trip with his students, the volcano island, the scene at the end where he goes to his father and says the thing he has needed to say since he was a child, in front of the man who scarred him and sent him away. I thought I wanted your love and approval, but what I actually wanted was to be a good person. And that is something I have to decide for myself. That speech is one of the most philosophically loaded moments in the show. It is a complete articulation of the Confucian principle that genuine virtue cannot be given by authority. It must be cultivated internally. The external trappings, the title, the approval, the public honor, can be granted by another person. The internal reality cannot. It can only be grown through choices made in specific situations where the cost is real and the reward is uncertain. Zuko's final hairstyle, loose and natural, is the show's visual summary of 3 seasons of work. Not the ponytail of the obsessive prince, not the shaved head of the exile, not the Fire Nation top knot of the returned heir, just hair, his own. Nothing to perform, nothing to prove. A person who has spent 3 seasons trying to become who he was supposed to be and arrived, at last, at who he actually is. The philosophical lesson the show draws through Zuko is not an optimistic one, exactly. It is honest. It does not say that people change easily. It says that people change through genuine contact with the consequences of who they have been, through relationships that cost them something, through moments of loss that cannot be converted into anything useful, and through the slow, uncomfortable work of looking at themselves without the protection of the identity they built to avoid doing exactly that. The change is real. The show earns it, and it takes the entire length of a 3-season story to be convincing. Section 8. The Avatar State and the Self. There is a question buried inside the Avatar mythology that the show never fully answers, and I think the refusal to answer it fully is intentional. The question is this: when Aang enters the Avatar state and channels all the previous avatars through his body, is he still himself? The Avatar state is visually one of the most striking things in the show. The eyes glow, the arrow tattoos illuminate. The air around the Avatar begins to move in ways that suggest a presence larger than any one person. When Aang enters the Avatar state in moments of extreme emotional stress, particularly in the early episodes before he has learned to control it, the result is elemental devastation on a scale that one person should not be capable of producing. It is as if the energy of 10,000 years of avatars, all the accumulated knowledge and power and grief and determination of every person who has ever carried the Avatar spirit, pours into one small 12-year-old body and expresses itself all at once. This is the show's most explicit exploration of the Buddhist concept of non-self. In Buddhist philosophy, the self is not a fixed entity, it is a process. A constantly changing collection of physical and mental events that is given the name self as a convenience, a way of referring to the particular pattern that this collection of processes takes, but which has no permanent, unchanging, essential core. The self is more like a river than a stone. The water changes constantly. The riverbed shifts. The river that exists today shares a name with the river that existed 1,000 years ago, and there is genuine continuity between them. but it is not the continuity of a single, unchanging thing. It is the continuity of a pattern. The avatar cycle is this philosophy rendered as a cosmological fact. The avatar is not Aang, exactly. Aang is the current form of the avatar spirit, the current river, carrying the pattern of 10,000 years of previous rivers. His personality, his choices, his specific loves and fears and quirks, those are genuinely his. But the power he carries, the cosmic function he serves, that is shared across all the instances of the pattern. When the avatar spirit dies in the avatar state, the pattern is broken. The river has no more bed to flow through. This is not just a plot rule. It is a philosophical statement about what the self is and what happens when the process that sustains it is interrupted at the deepest level. What the show explores through this is the relationship between individual identity and the larger processes we participate in without entirely owning. Aang is the avatar, but the avatar is not Aang. He carries the function without being reducible to it. This is something every person who takes on a significant role can recognize. The parent, the teacher, the healer, the leader, these are functions that have an existence larger than any particular person who performs them. The mother is not only the woman who is a mother, the teacher is not only the person who teaches, and yet the specific, irreplaceable personality of the person doing the function matters enormously to how it gets done. Aang's specific personality, his openness, his nonviolence, his love, his humor, his genuine delight in the world, shapes the way the avatar function is performed in his lifetime, in ways that are entirely different from how Roku performed it, or Yang Chen, or Kyoshi, or any of the others. Past avatars, when Aang consults them, offer wisdom from their own experience. But they cannot make his choices. They cannot feel what he feels. They can only be consulted, can only offer what their own paths taught them, which is often quite different from what this particular moment requires. The avatar's relationship with past lives is one of the show's deepest philosophical gifts. The idea that you are not only the product of your own single lifetime, that you carry within you the accumulated experience of everyone who has played the role you now play, that history is not only external but is in some sense internal, present in the very structure of who you are. This is not a fantasy concept. It is an honest description of how any person who takes seriously a lineage or a tradition actually experiences their identity. The teacher who carries the methods and insights of their own teachers. The doctor who practices medicine within a tradition built by thousands of previous practitioners. The artist who makes work informed by every piece of art they have ever absorbed. None of us begins from nothing. We are all, in some sense, avatars of what has come before, carrying the pattern of accumulated human wisdom and human mistake, trying to use it to navigate a specific present moment that no previous instance of the pattern has ever faced. The avatar state in this reading is not a superpower. It is full integration. It is the moment when the individual self and the accumulated wisdom of the tradition it participates in are no longer in separate relationship. They become the same motion. The distinction between Aang and the avatar spirit, between the 12-year-old boy and the 10,000-year-old pattern, dissolves, and what acts is not either of them alone, but the full reality of both. Complete. This is what enlightenment looks like in action. Not a quiet retreat from the world, not a serene detachment from the urgency of what is happening, but full presence, full integration, every resource available and none of them in conflict, the whole self, in all its layered, historical, paradoxical completeness, responding to what the moment actually needs. The goal is not to be in the avatar state all the time. No one can be in full integration all the time. The goal is what Guru Pathak calls mastery, the ability to move into and out of that state consciously, to access the full depth when it is needed, and to return to the ordinary, the personal, the specific, the small, when the moment calls for those instead. To be Aang the 12-year-old and the avatar simultaneously, not alternately, both true at once. Section 9. Power, Empire, and Moral Courage. Fire Lord Ozai is deliberately one-dimensional. The show knows this and acknowledges it. He is not given the complexity of Zuko or Azula or even Zhao, who at least has legible ambition underneath his cruelty. Ozai is written as a force of nature, a philosophical idea in human form, and the philosophical idea he represents is the seductive logic of absolute power. He believes genuinely that the Fire Nation's technological and military superiority entitles it to rule the world. that the other nations, which he understands as lesser, are not being conquered but elevated, that this is not violence but progress. This is the ideology of historical imperialism stated with remarkable precision for a children's show. The belief that the technologically advanced society is the more evolved society, and that therefore its expansion is not aggression but a gift, that the people who resist it are simply not yet sophisticated enough to understand what is being offered. This is the logic that justified a remarkable amount of the actual historical suffering of the actual world. And the show places this logic in the mouth of its primary villain, not because the logic is ridiculous, but because it is not. It is coherent. It is internally consistent. It has motivated real people with good intentions as well as bad ones. The danger of Ozai's ideology is not that it is obviously evil. It is that it sounds, from inside, like righteousness. The Fire Nation School is one of the show's most quietly devastating depictions of how this ideology perpetuates itself. In the third season, Aang goes undercover in a Fire Nation school and discovers that the children there are being taught a version of the 100-Year War in which the Fire Nation is the heroic civilizer and the other nations are the obstacles to progress. There is no war in this history, exactly. There is a mission of expansion. The genocide of the air nomads is not mentioned. The brutal occupation of the Earth Kingdom is framed as governance. The children in the school are not being taught lies so much as they are being taught a story that contains only the facts that make the story cohere. The rest has been removed, not in front of them, simply not placed there in the first place. This is the most chilling form of propaganda, because it requires no active deception on the part of the people delivering it. The teachers in the Fire Nation schools are not villains. They believe what they are teaching. They were educated in the same system. They have never been given access to the other version of the events. The erasure has been so complete and so long-standing that there is no lie to be caught, no moment of deliberate deception to be identified. There is only a story with certain things absent, a story that has been told so consistently to so many generations that the absence feels like the absence of something that simply does not exist, rather than the absence of something that has been removed. The show's response to this, through Zuko and through Aang, is not rage. It is something harder and more useful than rage. It is the willingness to look honestly at your own history and to say, this is what was done, and I am not going to pretend it was something else. Zuko's most significant act in the third season is not his fighting. It is a single line, delivered to his father, in which he describes the 100-Year War as something the Fire Nation started, something that cannot be justified, something that must end. He says this knowing that his father could kill him for it. He says it because it is true, and because he has reached the point in his journey where truth is not negotiable, even when it is terrifying. This is what the show calls moral courage, and it is distinct from physical courage. The Agni Kai with Ozai requires physical courage of an extraordinary kind. But the moment in the throne room where Zuko says, "This is what you have done and I will not participate in it anymore," requires moral courage, which is the willingness to see what is true about yourself and your history and to say it clearly, without the protection of self-justification, in front of the person whose judgment you most fear. Physical courage faces external danger. Moral courage faces internal one. The danger of seeing yourself clearly. The danger of becoming responsible for what you now know. The show's most philosophically consistent position on collective responsibility is embedded in Katara's arc. She is not the Fire Lord's daughter. She did not benefit from the war. She and her people are among its most direct victims. And yet the show asks her, in the most painful possible way, to make a choice about what to do with her legitimate, fully justified anger. Not to give it up, not to pretend it is not real, but to decide who she wants to be on the other side of it. Because the anger is real, and the injustice is real, and the loss is real, and none of that changes regardless of what she does with those feelings. The question is only what she builds next. This is the show's argument about the cycle of violence, and it is made carefully, never cheaply. It does not say that forgiveness is owed. It does not say that the people who did these things deserve mercy, because that is not actually what is at stake. What is at stake is what the person choosing forgiveness or choosing not to forgive does to themselves, what they become. Katara decides in that moment that she will not become the thing that destroyed her. That is not a small decision. That is one of the most significant philosophical acts the show depicts. It is also one of the most costly, because there is genuine grief in choosing not to take the one action that would feel like justice. Grief at the unfairness of being the one who has to be the bigger person. The show does not pretend that grief is not there. Sokka's relationship to the war is the show's most grounded and practically minded perspective. Sokka does not philosophize, he strategizes. He thinks about logistics and timing and the allocation of limited resources. He is the one who gets things done while everyone else is being emotionally significant. And in his own way, he represents the philosophical tradition that takes seriously the reality of means. Not just the rightness of the goal, the actual, physical, practical question of how you get from here to there without leaving too much wreckage behind you. The war in Avatar is not depicted as a problem that can be solved by the right philosophical position. It requires a plan. It requires people who can hold the philosophy and also move the pieces. Sokka's existence in the show is the argument that the intellectual or spiritual dimension of change is necessary but not sufficient. Aang's compassion is necessary but not sufficient. Iroh's wisdom is necessary but not sufficient. What is required is all of them together, each contributing what they are best at, each trusting the others to contribute what they cannot. This is itself a philosophical position. The position that no single perspective, no matter how rich, no matter how accurate, is enough on its own. That genuine change requires genuine collaboration, which requires genuine trust, which requires genuine love, which requires the willingness to be known by someone else, not just useful to them, actually known. Section 9.5 The Spirit World and the Nature of Reality. There is a layer of the Avatar world that sits just beneath the surface of everything visible, and most people who watch the show feel it without being able to name it. It is the spirit world, and the show's treatment of it is one of its most philosophically rich contributions, because the spirit world is not simply a separate dimension that exists alongside the physical one. It is the show's argument about the nature of reality itself. In most fantasy traditions, the spirit world is a place you go. You travel there. You do things there. You come back. It is a location, an address, another room in a house you already understood. Avatar's spirit world is something more interesting than that. It is not primarily a place, it is a relationship. The boundary between the physical world and the spirit world is not a wall or a door. It is a membrane, and its permeability depends on the quality of attention being paid to it. Aang can enter the spirit world through meditation, through the specific discipline of turning the attention inward until the outer world quiets enough for the deeper reality to become audible. The spirit world does not become accessible because he travels somewhere. It becomes accessible because he stops insisting on the ordinary surface of things. This is a deeply shamanistic understanding, drawn from traditions spread across the world, including the Inuit cultures that inform the water tribe, Tibetan Buddhist traditions that inform the air nomads, and Chinese folk religious practices that inform the Earth Kingdom. In all of these traditions, the spirit world is not separate from the physical world in the way that two countries are separate. It is the same world, apprehended differently. The spirits are always present. The capacity to perceive them varies based on the state of the observer. What Avatar adds to this understanding is the political dimension. The balance between the spirit world and the physical world is not just a personal spiritual matter. It is a public, material one. When the spirits are unsettled, when the balance between the two dimensions is disrupted, the effects are visible in the physical world. The land becomes unhealthy. Animals behave strangely. The natural world sends signals that something has gone wrong at a level deeper than the political. The 100-Year War is not just a political catastrophe. It is a spiritual one. A world in which conquest and domination are the organizing principles is a world that has disrupted its relationship with the spirit world, and the spirits are not neutral about this. They are restless. They are angry. They appear in unexpected places and behave in ways that the people of the physical world find incomprehensible, because the people of the physical world have largely stopped paying attention to the signals that the spirit world sends. Aang's role as the bridge between the two worlds is therefore not just a magical function. It is a therapeutic one. He is the person whose particular quality of attention, whose specific openness and genuine love for the world in all its dimensions, allows communication to flow between two realities that have become separated from each other. He does not command the spirits. He does not control them. He listens to them. He is genuinely curious about what they are experiencing, what they need, what has disturbed them. And his willingness to listen, to be a genuine interlocutor rather than simply an authority imposing order, is itself the philosophical position the show endorses. The spirit Wan Shi Tong, the library keeper who holds all the world's knowledge in his enormous underground library, is the show's most precise portrait of the danger of knowledge without wisdom. He has accumulated information from every civilization, every era, every corner of the world, and the result is not wisdom. It is a kind of paralysis. He has learned that humans use knowledge primarily as a weapon, and this has made him withdraw, has made him seal himself away with his collection, has made him decide that the answer to the misuse of knowledge is its scarcity. He is not wrong about the misuse. He is wrong about the remedy. Hoarding knowledge from those who might misuse it also withholds it from those who would use it well. And the result is a library that is, despite its immensity, dead. It has stopped growing. It has stopped being in relationship with the living world. And Wan Shitong himself has stopped being genuinely curious, which is the one quality that made the accumulation worthwhile in the first place. Hey Bai, the forest spirit who attacks the village near the edge of the foggy swamp because the forest he protects is being burned, is the show's most direct statement about ecological philosophy. His anger is not irrational. It is the grief and fury of a spirit whose entire reason for existing has been systematically destroyed by people who never considered that the forest was something other than a resource. The Fire Nation's industrial expansion, which has been burning forests and mining mountains and redirecting rivers for 100 years, has not just displaced human beings. It has severed the relationship between the physical world and the spirits who maintain its balance. When Aang restores Heibai to his forest by bringing a new sprout from the destruction, the moment works philosophically because it recognizes what was actually needed, not a victory over the spirit, a gesture of genuine restoration, an acknowledgement that the damage was real and that the work of healing requires something given, not just something promised. The design of the spirit world itself, in the animation, is one of the most honest visual representations of what contemplatives across many traditions have tried to describe about the experience of deeper states of consciousness. Colors that are simultaneously more vivid and more muted than ordinary colors. Spatial relationships that do not follow the rules of physical space, where size and distance are matters of significance rather than geometry. Time that moves differently, sometimes faster and sometimes not at all. The feeling of being in a place where the usual protective haze of ordinary perception has been stripped away, and reality is more immediately present, more overwhelming, more genuinely real than anything in the physical world seems when you are managing the ordinary day. This is not the show inventing a fantasy aesthetic. This is the show attempting an honest visual rendering of what contemplatives describe as the experience of moving beyond the ordinary mind. And whether or not you have any personal reference for that experience, the visual language of the spirit world communicates something that bypasses the analytical mind and lands somewhere more direct. You feel the difference between the two worlds. You do not just register it conceptually, you feel it. Ko, the face stealer, is the show's most philosophically concentrated horror. The creature who steals faces from anyone who shows an emotion in his presence is not simply a monster placed in the spirit world for dramatic effect. He is a test of the most demanding spiritual ideal in the show's repertoire, equanimity. The Buddhist and Taoist traditions both describe equanimity not as the absence of feeling, but as the capacity to be fully aware of feeling without being ruled by it, to notice the anger without acting from anger, to notice the fear without fleeing from it, to remain present and conscious and clear-eyed in the middle of an experience that is doing everything it can to destabilize you. Aang's encounter with Ko requires him to maintain exactly this kind of equanimity while Ko cycles through the faces of people Aang loves, while Ko speaks in a voice calibrated to provoke exactly the emotional reaction that will cost Aang his own face. And the show does not frame Aang's stillness in this moment as coldness or emotional absence. It frames it as effort, as the hardest thing he has done in the show up to that point. Sitting still in the middle of genuine terror, with genuine love at stake, and remaining present and clear and unsurprised by his own feeling. Not because he does not feel it, because he is bigger than what he feels in this moment, which is the precise definition of equanimity in its most demanding form. The spirit world also gives the show its deepest meditation on memory and identity. When Aang enters the spirit world and encounters his past lives, what he encounters is not simply stored information. It is living presence. Roku is not a recording. He is genuinely himself, with all the complexity and limitation that entails, including the fact that Roku's own choices, his friendship with Sozin and his failure to stop the war when he could have, are a significant part of what made Aang's century of ice necessary. The past avatars are not wisdom dispensers. They are people. People who made choices, sometimes good ones and sometimes terrible ones, and whose choices are the context that Aang is now navigating. This is the show's most adult philosophical position. The people who came before us are not simply resources. They are complicated. They made mistakes that we are still living inside. Our inheritance from them includes both the wisdom they accumulated and the damage they caused, and we do not get to take one without the other. The wisdom that Roku carries is genuine. The failure that Roku carries is also genuine. And Aang, as the current instance of the Avatar spirit, is responsible for both. Not for repeating the failure, but for carrying the awareness of it honestly. For allowing it to be part of what shapes his choices, rather than pretending that the inheritance is only the glorious parts. The spirit world, finally, is the show's argument that the most important things are not visible. That the health of a world depends on relationships that operate beneath the surface of politics and economics and military power. That a civilization that has lost its relationship with the deeper dimensions of reality, that has stopped listening to the signals that the non-human world sends, that has decided that its own purposes are the only purposes that matter, is a civilization that has cut itself off from the roots of its own existence. And a civilization without roots is exactly what the Fire Nation has become. Powerful, expansive, technically brilliant, and completely, catastrophically out of contact with the living world that is trying to tell it that something has gone very wrong. The Avatar's job, in the deepest sense, is not to win wars. It is to restore that contact. To be the person who keeps the line open between the world that is visible and the world that makes the visible world possible. That is what balance means at its most fundamental level. Not the balance between nations, though that matters. Not even the balance between elements, though that matters too. The balance between what can be seen and what can only be felt. Between the ordinary surface of a world that is very busy managing its own affairs and the deeper current that runs underneath it, patient and persistent, sending signals that only the most open kind of attention can receive. Section 10. The quiet wisdom of the supporting cast. Toph Beifong is introduced as the greatest earthbender in the world, and this is true in a specific and important sense. She is not just technically superior. She has arrived at an understanding of earthbending that no one who can see has ever reached, because she has had to understand it from the inside rather than from the outside. Her blindness, which everyone in her life before Aang treats as a limitation to be compensated for, turns out to be the condition of her particular genius. She does not see the earth. She feels it. Through the soles of her feet, through every vibration in the ground, she reads the world as a continuous field of texture and density and movement. She lives in a three-dimensional seismic map of her immediate environment, and nothing that happens within that environment can be hidden from her. The philosophical question Toph poses to the rest of the cast is about the nature of limitation and adaptation. She is the show's most direct embodiment of the idea that what looks like a disability from outside a person is often, from inside that person's experience, simply a different relationship with reality. Not a lesser relationship, a different one, with its own advantages and its own blind spots. The show's pun is intentional and genuinely useful. Her seismic sense gives her a form of perception that no sighted earthbender has ever possessed, and it leads her to invent metal bending, which changes the physics of the entire element in a single afternoon. She is also the show's most honest portrait of a child whose gifts were suppressed by the people who were supposed to protect them. Her parents kept her hidden, kept her safe, kept her wrapped in the cotton of a wealthy family's careful management, and in doing so, they very nearly turned her greatest gift into a secret she carried alone. When she first bends earth in her parents' house, it is not a rebellion for its own sake. It is the first time in her life she has been allowed to be exactly what she is. The relief on her face in that moment is the show's most precise depiction of what it costs a person to be kept small. Katara's evolution across the show is a meditation on the relationship between nurturing and power. She begins as the group's caretaker, the one who feeds and heals and holds the team together through the invisible labor of emotional management. She is not just a waterbender. She is a mother figure, a healer, the empathic center of the group's emotional life. And the show honors this role without reducing her to it. It watches her discover, over 3 seasons, that nurturing and ferocity are not opposites. That the same quality that makes her care for people she loves with extraordinary depth is the quality that makes her terrifying in defense of them. Her waterbending grows fiercer and more powerful, exactly as her emotional world grows more complex. She does not have to choose between being the healer and being the warrior. She is both because they come from the same place. Sokka is the show's everyman and its strategic mind, but his deepest philosophical function is to represent the person who succeeds without supernatural advantage. In a world where power is allocated by what you can bend, Sokka bends nothing. He has no special ability. What he has is a sharp mind, a willingness to work harder than anyone around him, and a stubborn refusal to accept that his contribution matters less because it cannot be measured in elemental force. His arc is quietly the most universally applicable in the show, because most people are Sokka. Most people do not have blue fire or seismic sense, or the ability to call upon 10,000 years of ancestral wisdom. Most people have their brains, their hands, the people they love, and their willingness to show up. Azula is the show's most philosophically complex villain, precisely because she is not cruel in the way Ozai is cruel. Ozai is cruel from indifference, from the specific sociopathy of someone who has never needed to care about anyone else's inner life. Azula is cruel in the more painful way, the way of someone who has enormous intelligence and perception and absolutely no safe outlet for either. She reads people with clinical accuracy. She understands motivation and psychology and the architecture of relationships better than almost anyone else in the show. And she uses all of this to control, because control is the one form of relationship she was taught to trust. Her breakdown in the finale is the show's most uncomfortable act of empathy. The audience has spent 2.5 seasons being frightened of Azula, and for good reason. She is genuinely dangerous. She is the most capable antagonist in the show's roster. And then, when everything around her comes apart, when Mai and Ty Lee choose their own agency over her demands and Zuko refuses to be what she needs him to be, the audience watches the most powerful firebender of her generation sit in front of a mirror and cut her own hair and see her mother's face looking back at her. And the creature underneath all that performance, all that control, all that blue fire, is a frightened child who decided very young that love was not reliable and control was the only alternative, and has been paying the price of that decision ever since. The show does not redeem Azula. It does not give her an arc that resolves into peace. It gives her, instead, the dignity of being seen clearly, without the narrative forcing her to be something she is not ready to be. She is broken at the end. She is not evil at the end. She is someone who was built for war and arrived at a world that was asking for something else, and she does not yet know how to be that. The show trusts the audience to hold both the genuine danger she posed and the genuine suffering underneath it. Both are true. Neither cancels the other. Section 11. The Geometry of Chosen Family. Before we arrive at the final resting place, there is something worth sitting with that does not get discussed as often as the philosophy of elements, or the cosmology of spirits, or the ethics of empire. And it is the structure of the group itself. The particular shape of what Aang and Katara and Sokka and Toph, and eventually Zuko, form together. Because the philosophy of Avatar is not only in the big ideas, it is in the daily texture of how these specific people exist alongside each other and what the show argues about the nature of human connection through the way it depicts them. The word family gets used loosely in most storytelling, but Avatar earns it. The chosen family at the center of the show is not assembled because its members are compatible. They are assembled because the world requires them to be together, and then the show watches them become compatible, which is a completely different and much more interesting process. Compatibility is a static quality, two things that fit. What Avatar depicts is something dynamic. People who do not fit discovering, through the specific friction of prolonged close contact under difficult circumstances, what it means to need someone and to be needed in return. And how that mutual need, when honestly acknowledged and honestly tended to, becomes something that no dictionary word quite captures. Aang and Katara are the emotional core of the group, and their relationship is drawn with a delicacy that most adult dramas do not manage. They are each other's primary witness. Katara is the first person to believe in Aang, genuinely believe in him, before she had any evidence that he was capable of doing what the world needed him to do. She believed in the person before the Avatar. She saw Aang, specifically and precisely, with all his playfulness and his grief and his habit of deflecting from anything too heavy, and she chose him, not the function, the person. For Aang, Katara is the first person since the ice who has looked at him without wanting something from him. Every other relationship in his new post-ice world is defined by what he is supposed to be. He is the Avatar. He is the one who must save everyone. The Fire Nation wants him captured. The Earth Kingdom wants him to move faster. Even Sokka, lovable as he is, spends most of the first season thinking of Aang primarily as a strategic asset. But Katara wants him to be okay. She wants to know if he slept and if he has eaten and what he is feeling when he goes quiet. This quality of attention, the specific attention of someone who cares about the interior life of the person they are attending to, is the thing that makes Katara irreplaceable to Aang in a way that no one else is. Sokka's friendship with Aang is built on something different and equally important: respect for difference. Sokka does not understand Aang's relationship to the spiritual world. He does not understand meditation or chakras or the avatar state. He approaches most things from a firmly material, strategic, slightly skeptical perspective that is the philosophical opposite of Aang's intuitive openness. And the show never resolves this. It never converts Sokka into a believer or Aang into a pragmatist. It simply shows two people who genuinely respect each other operating from entirely different frameworks, and it suggests that this combination, the dreamer and the planner, the spiritual and the practical, produces something more resilient than either would produce alone. The relationship between Toph and Zuko is one of the show's quietest gifts. They are the two most prickly, most defended, most apparently self-sufficient members of the group. Both of them come from backgrounds that taught them that vulnerability is dangerous. Toph was treated as fragile by her parents and responded by becoming as visibly invulnerable as possible. Zuko was treated as disposable by his father and responded by performing strength so continuously that he almost forgot it was a performance. When they are put together, there is a recognition between them that operates almost below the level of speech. Two people who understand what it costs to pretend that you need nothing, who see through each other's defenses not because they are perceptive in an analytical way, but because the defenses are familiar. They wear the same kind of armor. They know the weight of it. The group's dynamic also models something philosophically important about the nature of belonging. Belonging, as the show depicts it, is not achieved by conforming to a group's expectations. It is not earned by being the most useful or the most agreeable or the least trouble. It is arrived at through being genuinely known. Toph is not accepted into the group because she makes it easy for them. She is accepted because she is genuinely herself, which is at first disruptive and eventually essential. Zuko's acceptance into the group is the show's most careful depiction of this principle, because his acceptance requires the group to extend something very difficult. Not forgiveness, exactly. More like the decision to judge him by who he is proving himself to be, rather than who he was when he was trying to capture them. The decision to let the past be the past without pretending it did not happen. What makes this work in the show is that it is not painless. Katara does not easily accept Zuko. Her anger at him is legitimate, grounded in real harm he caused, and the show does not ask her to perform acceptance she does not feel. It watches her arrive at a genuine, costly, privately negotiated decision to give him a chance, not because it is required of her, but because she is the kind of person who has looked hard at what vengeance costs and decided it is not worth it. And even after that decision, the relationship between them carries the texture of its history. It is not warm in the way Sokka and Aang are warm. It is something more carefully built, more aware of its own foundation, more like the respect between two people who have tested each other and found that the other does not break. The show's most philosophically significant statement about chosen family is embedded in a line Katara delivers during Aang's lowest moment. Early in the series, when he has just discovered what happened to his people and entered the Avatar state and is in the middle of grief so large that it has become power, she says to him, "You still have a family. We are your family now." And this is not a consolation prize. It is not offered as a replacement for what was lost, as if the new family cancels out the grief of the old one. It is offered as something that genuinely exists alongside the grief. Something true right now, in this specific moment. Regardless of everything that has been lost, we are here. We are yours. That is real. This understanding of family as something that exists in the present tense, rather than only in the past tense, as something chosen and maintained through daily acts of care, rather than simply inherited and therefore permanent, is one of the most useful philosophical positions the show offers. It is genuinely difficult to hold on to in the experience of real grief. When the people who were supposed to be there are gone, the gap they leave is not filled by the people who are present, but the people who are present are real. Their care is real. Their presence is real. And learning to feel that reality, to let it be a genuine source of something, without requiring it to be the same thing as what was lost, is the work that Aang does across 3 seasons. The work of allowing the new family to be the new family, in all its specific and imperfect and genuinely loving reality, without it having to replace or erase or be less than what came before. The group changes each other. This is the show's deepest depiction of genuine relationship, not the surface change of influence, where one person's habits rub off on another. The structural change of genuine encounter, where being in the continuous presence of someone who is fundamentally different from you slowly, genuinely, permanently alters what is possible for you. Toph learns to trust. Not completely, not without backsliding, but she learns it in the specific, embodied way that only happens through repeated experiences of being trusted and having that trust prove warranted. Zuko learns that the expression of warmth does not cost him the dignity he spent so long trying to protect. Sokka learns that the things he cannot measure still matter. Aang learns to be still. None of these learnings happen because someone tells them to change. They happen because the specific people they are with, by being genuinely themselves, create the conditions in which the change becomes possible. The teacher is not always the wisest person in the room. Sometimes the teacher is whoever happens to be sitting next to you when you most need to learn the thing they embody without knowing they are teaching it. This is the show's most hopeful philosophical claim. That we are not finished. That the people we are at any given moment are not the final version of who we will be. That the encounters we have not yet had, the people we have not yet been genuinely known by, are still out there, still capable of reaching something in us that our current life has not yet reached. That transformation is not a destination. It is the continuous condition of a life lived in genuine relationship. The Avatar cycle itself is the longest expression of this principle in the show's mythology. No single Avatar completes the work. No single Avatar brings the world to a final, stable peace that requires no further tending. Each one does what they can, in the specific historical moment they are given, with the specific gifts and flaws and relationships of their particular life, and then they pass the pattern on. The next Avatar inherits both the wisdom and the failure, the strength and the wound, and begins again in a new body in a new historical moment with the same fundamental charge. Keep the balance, be the bridge. Do not let any one element swallow the rest. This is not discouraging. It is, in its way, deeply comforting. The work does not depend on perfection. It does not depend on a single exceptional life that gets everything right. It depends on the continuous, imperfect, sincere effort of whoever is alive right now, making the best choices they can with the understanding they currently have, in the genuine and humble knowledge that they are not the first to try and will not be the last. You are not the Avatar. Neither am I. But the principle applies. The work of balance is not completed by any single person in any single lifetime. It is a pattern that gets handed on. What we contribute to it is what we genuinely do in the specific lives we have with the specific people we find ourselves among. The accumulation of those contributions across people and generations and all the ways human beings have tried to make the world a little more like the world they wanted to live in, that accumulation is itself the Avatar cycle, understood as a human rather than a spiritual phenomenon. Section 12. What the show teaches us about how to live. There is something that happens to a person who returns to Avatar, The Last Airbender, after a significant amount of life has passed since they last watched it. Not the sudden realization that it was better than they remembered, though it usually is. Something subtler and more specific than that. The feeling of a world that has been waiting for them. Not patiently exactly, because patience implies time passing, and a world waiting has no sense of time. More like the feeling of a room you have always had access to, a room whose door you can open anytime you choose, and the room is exactly as it was whenever you left it, and yet somehow what you find inside it is different every time. Because you are different every time. And the room holds more than any single version of you was equipped to receive. That is the architecture of the show. It was not built for a single age or a single mood or a single reading. It was built to be larger than any one encounter with it. The philosophy embedded in every frame, in every fight sequence choreographed from real martial arts traditions, in every piece of background calligraphy hand-brushed by a scholar who understood that the things no one notices still matter because they are still there, that philosophy is not a coat of paint on the surface of the show. It is structural. It is the reason the show holds up. The reason it does not shrink or become dated or collapse under the weight of time the way so many things from the same era have. There is a reason Avatar, The Last Airbender, endures the way it does, returning to people across decades and life stages, giving something different and something useful at every age, and the reason is not any single element of it. It is not the martial arts or the mythology or the visual design or the music, though all of those are extraordinary. The reason is that the show genuinely believes that how you live matters. Not only the large choices, the ones where history is watching and the fate of the world is explicitly at stake, but the small ones, the daily ones. The moment you choose patience instead of frustration, the moment you tell the truth when the lie would be easier, the moment you reach towards someone who frightens you because the reaching matters more than the fear. This is the philosophical core that all the Buddhism and Taoism and Confucianism and Hindu chakra philosophy and real-world martial arts choreography ultimately serve. Not the intellectual content of those traditions, though that content is handled with remarkable care and respect. The lived application of them, what it looks like when a person actually tries to embody these ideas in a specific life with specific fears and specific failures in a world that does not cooperate. What the show offers as a guide for living, drawn across all 3 seasons and expressed through every character, amounts to something like this. Seek balance, not victory. Recognize that your greatest strengths and your greatest vulnerabilities are usually the same thing. Do the work of understanding who you actually are rather than who you have been told to be or told you cannot be. Care for the people around you with the specific, practical attention of someone who knows that love is a verb before it is a feeling. Accept grief as a companion rather than an obstacle. Let the fire in you be honest fire, driven by something genuinely alive rather than something you perform. And when you do not know what to do, when the situation is too complex and the right answer is not visible, be still. Go quiet. Trust that the wisdom you need is not only in your own head. The show teaches these things not through lectures but through watching characters fail to embody them and then gradually learn to do better. Aang fails to be still. He fails to be present. He runs from his destiny until the destiny has to reach into the ice and pull him out. Zuko fails to be honest. He fails to choose his own values over his father's demands. He fails so thoroughly and for so long that most viewers have given up on him at least once before he turns. Katara fails to redirect her anger, to distinguish between the Fire Nation as an empire and the Fire Nation as a collection of individual people who are also mostly victims of that empire. Every character fails in ways that are philosophically coherent, ways that grow directly from who they are and what they need and what they are afraid of. And the show watches them fail with patience and with love. This is important. The failures are not punished by a narrative that has decided in advance who these people should be. The failures are shown as part of the process, as necessary, as the material from which the genuine change is eventually built. You cannot become Zuko at the end without being Zuko at the beginning. The arc requires the darkness. Not as a dramatic device, but as the honest depiction of how people actually change, which is slowly, through contact with consequences they cannot avoid, through relationships that reach them where they actually are, through the accumulated weight of small moments that reorient the direction by increments invisible, until suddenly the change is visible. The chosen family at the heart of the show, Aang and Katara and Sokka and Toph and Zuko and eventually Iroh, is itself a philosophical argument. An argument that the bonds we forge through shared experience, through surviving difficult things together, through being known by people who are not required to love us and love us anyway, are not lesser than the bonds we are born into. They may be, in certain ways, more genuinely transformative, because they require choice, because they require the daily decision to remain in relationship with people who challenge us and who we challenge, who we fail and who fail us, who we are genuinely known by rather than merely tolerated. The show ends with a sunset, a slow pullback from a rooftop in Ba Sing Se. 2 people who love each other, a city at peace, a world still recovering from the damage that was done to it. The recovery is not complete. It will not be complete for a long time. Some of what was destroyed cannot be rebuilt in the way it was. The air nomads are gone. The 100 years of war have left marks that will outlast anyone currently alive. There are no clean endings here. What there is in that final frame is the feeling of something real being possible, not the arrival at a perfect world. The beginning of genuine work on an imperfect one. The sense that the people doing that work are capable of it, are equipped for it, have been shaped by everything they have been through into exactly the people the work requires. That is not hope as a feeling. That is hope as a conviction. A conviction earned through 3 seasons of watching these specific people, with their specific flaws and gifts and histories, do the specific, imperfect, beautiful work of holding a world together through the force of their love for it. The show has been telling you, from the very first moment, from that first smile, that the world is worth loving. Not because it is safe, not because it is kind, not because it will not break you, but because the alternative, a world where no one has decided it is worth the effort, is the world of the Fire Lord. And the world of the Fire Lord is a world where the moon turns red, and the ocean goes still, and the only light is the blue fire of someone who ran out of everything else to burn. You are not watching this show by accident. You came back to it for a reason, or you found it for a reason, and that reason is something about needing to be reminded that the questions matter, that the quality of your attention to the people around you and the world you move through and the small choices you make every single day is the sum of who you are. Not the big moments, the small ones. The moment you choose to listen instead of speaking. The moment you make the tea. The moment you sleep with your feet off the ground because you need to turn off your seismic sense for one night and just rest. The world of Avatar is still here. Every time you come back to it, it gives you something new. Because you are always coming back to it as someone who has lived more than you had lived the last time. The show grows with you, not because it changes, but because you do. And the philosophical architecture underneath every frame is solid enough and deep enough and carefully enough built to hold whatever version of you shows up tonight. Let it carry you. Let the elements do what they do. Let the air take you somewhere light. Let the earth hold you where you are. Let the water find its own level. Let the fire, the honest fire, the source fire, the one that burns because it is alive and not because it is angry, let it warm you as you drift down into whatever kind of sleep this particular night has waiting for you. The Avatar is always in the middle of their training, always somewhere between where they started and where they are going, always carrying more than any one person should have to carry, and always, somehow, still smiling at the new thing. Still open to being surprised by what the world turns out to be when you look at it without the protection of already having decided what it is. The thing about a great philosophical tradition, whether it lives in a text that is thousands of years old or in 61 episodes of animated storytelling from a Saturday afternoon children's network, is that it does not argue. It does not demand that you accept its conclusions. It presents its picture of the world as honestly as it can, with as much care and attention as it is capable of bringing, and then it trusts you to take from it what is useful and leave the rest. That trust is itself a philosophical position. The position that the person encountering the ideas is capable of thinking, capable of discernment, capable of arriving at their own genuine understanding rather than simply absorbing a message and repeating it. Avatar trusts you in exactly this way. It never tells you what to think about the war. It never tells you what to feel about Zuko. It never tells you how to resolve the tension between Aang's pacifism and the violence the world seems to require. It shows you all of it with as much honesty as it can manage, and then it waits, without demanding an answer, for you to sit with the questions it has given you. Some of those questions will follow you out of the show and into your ordinary days. You will be in a difficult conversation, and suddenly the question of whether to redirect the energy or to stand your ground will feel like a real question, rather than a bending philosophy. You will be carrying something heavy, and Iroh will be there, quietly, not demanding that you process faster than you are able, simply present, the way he is present for Zuko through all those years of wrong choices and slow turning. You will be in a moment where someone you love is in pain and you cannot fix it, and Katara will be there too, saying nothing but reaching toward the water, the healing power, the specific, practical love that takes the form of doing rather than explaining. These are the gifts the show leaves behind. Not conclusions, not answers. The specific quality of attention it modeled, paid to the world and to the people in it, for 61 episodes. That quality of attention, once you have absorbed it over enough viewings at enough different ages, begins to feel like something you carry. A way of looking that the show taught you before you knew you were being taught. Zuko asks his uncle, in one of the final episodes, how he can have so much faith in him after everything. And Iroh tells him that he never lost faith because he always saw what Zuko was capable of being. He did not choose to believe in the person Zuko was. He chose to believe in the person Zuko was becoming, and he held that belief patiently, across all the wrong choices and the backsliding and the years of distance, because that is what genuine faith in another person looks like. Not the faith that you will not be disappointed. The faith that the person is worth believing in regardless. That is the philosophy. That is all of it, really. The rest is just elaboration, the calligraphy, the moon phases, the sleeping position of a blind girl, the name of a lemur, the way a scar sits in the light depending on which side of a face the camera chooses to show. All of it elaborate, careful, patient service of the thing at the center. The belief that people are worth believing in, that the world is worth the effort of tending. That balance, genuine balance, the kind that contains opposition rather than eliminating it, is possible for long enough in enough specific moments to make the world worth living in. And if you have been here for this whole journey, this long, slow, careful walk through the philosophy of a show that was made for 6-year-olds and keeps revealing new rooms to 36-year-olds, then you already know something about what that belief feels like. You feel it every time you come back, every time the opening notes of the score reach you, every time Aang smiles at something new and you find, despite everything, that you are smiling too. If this video found you somewhere that you needed it tonight, leave a like. It genuinely helps more than you might expect. And if this kind of long, slow, careful content is something you want to keep finding when you come back, subscribing is the one thing that makes sure you do. These videos take a long time, and they are made with the same principle the show operates on, that the things you do not notice working on you are the things that matter most. The details you absorb without registering them are the ones that build the feeling of a world. And this channel is trying, always, to build that feeling for you. Sleep well. The balance is worth working on. Come back when you need reminding. The room will be exactly as you left it.